I hope some points get across. Okay, so as we all know, the Passover is the story of the Israelites taking refuge in God, escaping plagues and fleeing Egypt. And during the last plague, they put the blood around the doorpost and sheltered in their houses while the angel of death passed over, and it paved the way to the promised land. And Revelation describes another Passover. Spiritual Jews are to take refuge in God. Instead of fleeing from Egypt, they flee from Babylon. As chapter 18 says, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or contract any of her plagues." So instead of blood on the doorposts, we have robes dipped in the blood of the Lamb, as chapter 7 says. "These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So Egypt had 10 plagues. Revelation has 7 seals, trumpets, and bowls, and they're the equivalent of the 10 plagues. Only they're not in Egypt, they're in Babylon, and the Jews who didn't leave Babylon. They're a witness. And when you understand what they're talking about and how they're woven into the rest of the story of the Bible, I find it really mind-blowing. So I've got a list of quotes to show how Babylon in Revelation parallels the story of leaving Egypt to go to the Promised Land. So in Exodus, they were told, "Leave Egypt, go to the Promised Land." And in Revelation, it says, "Come out of her so that you will not receive her plagues." So we've got this idea of plagues in Revelation. In Egypt, God said, "I will redeem you with acts of judgment." And the same thing in Revelation, "True and just are your judgments." In leaving Egypt, we see the blood. He will see the blood and pass over the doorway. In Revelation, they've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. In Egypt, we know they were told to leave, and God looked after them in the wilderness. As Nehemiah says, "You in your great compassion did not forsake them in the wilderness." And we have in Revelation 7, "The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God." And the woman is the church. In Revelation, we've got the mention of eagle's wings. "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Got the same thing in Revelation. "The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness." And of course, when they got to Jericho, the 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." So on the 7th trumpet, the city fell. And then in Revelation, when the 7th angel sounds his trumpet, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah. And finally, my last comparison, in the Exodus story, we've got the Song of Moses, and Egypt sinks. "They, Egypt, sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Lord?" And Revelation specifically gives us a reminder of the Song of Moses. They sang the Song of Moses, God's servant Moses, and of the Lamb, a mention of the Lamb again. And in chapter 18, we're told that Babylon sinks. "Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, 'With such violence, the great city Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again.'" So you can see this huge parallel between leaving Egypt and leaving Babylon, and this witness of plagues. So, as well as that, Revelation, it's a message crying out that Jesus was our Passover lamb. There's 22 chapters in Revelation, and 11 of them talk of the lamb. It's the highest concentration of lamb verses in the Bible. So in Revelation, we've got Jesus described with white hair like wool, the lamb that was slain, the lamb who opens the seal. Our robes are washed in the blood of the lamb. The first fruits to the lamb, the song of the lamb on Mount Zion, the light of the lamb, the wrath of the lamb, the 12 apostles of the lamb, and the throne of the lamb. Like, it's just crying out, this is about Jesus, the Passover lamb. So let's think about the meaning of the blood. At Passover, the blood on the doorpost was provided by the life of an innocent lamb, yet it pointed to something much greater, the life of an innocent man. And Revelation tells us, to him who loves us and has released us from our sins by his blood. And of course, Corinthians says, Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. So now, in maybe 10 minutes or so, I'd like to zoom through really quickly how Revelation is set out and how the plagues work, so that we understand it. Because when you understand it, it's so exciting. So we've got the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, and they've all got the same end point, which is a great earthquake. And in Bible symbology, and I find really helpful reading Isaac Newton's interpretation of the symbology of the Bible. You can realize that things you might take literally, they've got more of a symbolic meaning. For instance, a great earthquake means the shaking of a kingdom or rulers. And the greatest earthquake ever will be when the kingdoms of the world become the kingdom of God. And that's how Revelation, the seals, trumpets, and bowls all end with the greatest earthquake ever. So they've all got the same end point. So it's pretty obvious that they've all got the same starting point. They run in parallel, the same beginning, the same end. And in fact, they're three perspectives on the same event. So this is really helpful, because if we've got something about a trumpet event, we can see what's happening at the same time with the bowl and seal event, because it's the same epoch in history, and you can line up the three. And when you do that, it's just amazing how it all unfolds. So the first four seals, trumpets, and bowls are all to do with the Jews. Then there's a seeming gap, and the last three are placed in the last days when the Jews come back to the land. And the interpretation of the first four is entirely in the Old Testament. So I'll just go through it quickly. Well, I'll give you some, or maybe I'll read these out. I'll sort of prove it a bit as I go through, but I think the first seal, trumpet, and bowl all talk about the time from the death of Christ, the Passover lamb. He was cut off in the middle of the final 7 of Daniel's 70-week prophecy, leaving an unfinished period of 3.5 years. So Jesus witnessed for 3.5 years, and then he was killed. And Revelation is just absolutely full of pointers back to his ministry. So 3.5 years is 1,260 days, which is the time of the two witnesses. It's described as 42 months, which is the witness of the beast. And it's also time, and half a time. that is known to be 3.5 years. So Revelation is screaming out, this is completing the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70-week prophecy, but the times have become representative. So number one, it begins at the death of Christ, the Passover lamb, and they're the escalating curses on Israel for forsaking the covenant. I'll go to the next slide. So when we read in Revelation 8 that a third of the trees and the grass were burned, a third of earth and trees were burned up and all the green grass, it's a reminder of the curses on Israel in Ezekiel. This curses by thirds is what Ezekiel 5 is talking about. And in fact, all the, I think it's the trumpets, have nearly all the trumpets refer to a third of people dying, a third of this, a third of that, because it's pointing back to a third will die of plague or famine in Ezekiel. The land will be a burning waste because this people abandoned the covenant of the Lord. And so that's what it's talking about. It's a reminder of the escalating curses on them. And another example, we'll go to number two seal, trumpet and bowl. That brings us to, I can't read my own writing. Hang on, let me go back to that other slide. The mountain of Judaism is cast into the sea, the conflict between Jews and Christians. Okay, so we've progressed after the time of Christ to the Jews hating the Christians, and this hang on, I just have to find the right notes. Okay, so I'll read what I've written here. The second parallel visions refer to the conflict between the Jews and Christians and Israel losing their place in heaven. So we're told in Revelation 8, a large burning mountain was cast into the sea. So God is no longer in Judaism, which is the burning mountain of the trumpets of Revelation 8. So if we read Deuteronomy, that's how the Moses and the tablets were described. Moses went down the mountain while it was ablaze with fire, the 2 tablets of covenant in his hands. And Deuteronomy 4 says, you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain while it blazed with fire to the very heavens. If you then become corrupt, you will quickly perish from the land. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples. So this is the mountain of blazing fire right up to the very heavens. It's Judaism. And even when Jesus said to the disciples, if you have faith as the grain of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, be cast into the sea. I'm sure he's talking about Judaism and how they've gotten their belief system wrong. So this is the burning mountain that Revelation 8 refers to. God's no longer in the Judaism thing. The covenant's gone out to the Christians now. So then we move to number 3. And Revelation 8 says, a great star fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter. So the third series of visions lines up with the events of 70 AD. And Revelation 6 quotes Leviticus 26, the curse of famine on Jews in their cities, food being weighed out with scales. In Revelation 8, the water is made bitter. It's not referring to Chernobyl, like I've heard some people say, wormwood is the same word as Chernobyl. It's referring to this Old Testament quote in Jeremiah, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood and give them poisoned water to drink. Again, this is all about the Jews forsaking the covenant. let's look at number 4. The fourth group depicts the full curses of the law on the Jews. And now we're up to the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135. 580,000 Jews were killed. Many towns of Judea destroyed. Judea was renamed Palestine. The Jews were banned from Jerusalem. The reference to a quarter of the earth refers to Judea. Remember, after King Herod died, his kingdom was split between 4, and it was only actually Judea that the Romans had full control over, because there was still sort of this the Herodian type rulers in the other 3 quarters, but it was Judea where the Jews were totally banned from and not allowed to enter Jerusalem. And some even fled to Galilee because they were fairly safe in Galilee. So that's, I think, why it refers to a quarter of the earth killed by storm, famine, and plague. And again, back in Ezekiel 5, I'll send famine and wild beast against you. Plague and bloodshed will sweep through you, and I will bring the sword against you. And this is the terminology picked up in Revelation. Oh yes. Right. So the next section is where we are now. So there's this sort of seeming gap in the prophecy while the Jews are scattered. But in actual fact, it's the time, the 1260 years, that the 2 witnesses, being the Christians and Jews, prophesy in sackcloth. But the seals 5, 6, and 7 pick up from the time of Hitler. So how can I say that? Because Revelation 12 finishes with the dragon on the shore of the sea, and then in chapter 13, a beast rises out of the sea, and it's got 10 crowned horns. So this, and it's got a wounded head that's healed. So I believe that the wounded head is Hitler, and he's actually the first beast, but he morphs across into the next beast. And I love this picture. He's sitting here with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and they have the same ideals, to wipe out the Jews. And in fact, Hitler had an army that was made up of Arabs from the Grand Mufti supplied, because he wanted to wipe them out too. So Hitler, the sea in Bible prophecy is the nation. So the beast comes out of the nations. He's already got a mortally wounded head, which is Hitler and Germany. That those ideas come alive again with the Arabs who hate Israel and want to wipe them out. And the 10 crowned horns are the Arab rulers and the Jews. They all got their land after the around the time of the Second World War. They were allocated territories, thus they have crowns on their 10 horns, whereas in Revelation 12, the dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns, but only 7 crowns on the horns, because the 7 crowns represent the area of Israel, because God said, I will give you the land of 7 nations. So Israel was the land of 7. And so that's why they had 7 crowned horns. But now we're at 10 crowned horns, the days of the 10-toe kings of Daniel 2. So we've come to the time Israel are back in their land. And so, yeah, that sort of, so seal 5 and the trumpet and bowl number 5 are all talking about the throne of the beast in darkness. So the plagues are on the kingdoms of men, sort of we're not so focused on the Jews now, it's more on Babylon. And so this is exactly where we are now under this green circle. So we can compare the seal, trumpet and bowl of number 6 and see exactly where we are today. which is really exciting. So for seal number 6, it says, there was a great earthquake, the sun became black, the moon as blood, stars fell, and moving on a bit, mountains and islands moved, kings of the earth, every slave and free man hid in caves and rocks of the earth, which I think is what we're in the middle of now. And if you want a different perspective of events of this time, we go to the trumpet. The sixth angel blew his trumpet and released 4 angels at the great river Euphrates. Myriads of troops brought 3 plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur and killed 1/3 of men. And so this is happening in the area of the Euphrates, where we've seen this fighting for quite a while now. And then the sixth bowl, the sixth angel poured his bowl on the Euphrates. The water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. 3 foul spirits go out to the kings of the earth and the whole world. And get this, behold, I come as a thief. So we've got all these events we can recognize lined up. And in the middle of this, it says, behold, I come as a thief. And then moving on to number 7, well, that is the woe for number 7 is the woe to the kingdoms of men. It's actually not a woe for us, because it's the kingdom of God, and we're actually excited about it. So let's see. Well, I haven't actually written that much, but yeah, so the huge hailstones, they're like a symbol of warfare. So all these things that you might take literally, if you read Isaac Newton's symbols, it really gives a good way to interpret them. I just see that this plague, so all these plagues that have happened for the last 2,000 years are like the plagues on Egypt. They're to a plea to everyone to recognize these things were all told by God. Everything that happened to the Jews, they're scattering, they're regathering, and now all this mess in the Middle East, especially around, Iraq, Syria, the Euphrates, that whole basin. And now when kings of the earth from down, like this plague is not a respecter of person. It has everyone hiding in caves and rocks, which is a symbol of towns and cities. And this is something that even Boris Johnson's affected by, it just affects everyone. And I just see that as a really big sign amidst all these other big signs that we're very close to Jesus coming. And so then Revelation sums up this judgment on Babylon. I'll just read. Come out of her, my people, lest you partake in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquity. The merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Then a mighty angel took up a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down and will be found no more. And if you read the whole of Revelation 8, it really reads like a huge financial collapse that's coming as well. Certainly men's hearts failing for fear. And then, of course, we've got the judgment of Mystery Babylon as well. The harlot had on her head Mystery Babylon. And I believe that's Israel who became Babylon. She never left Babylon. And unfortunately for Israel, the beast is going to, says the beast turns on the harlot, attacks her, burns her with fire, and she lies, she dies, well, for a little time. And so, so that's about it. the message, I think, of Revelation is have the mark of the Lamb, not the mark of the beast. So that's my thought. So maybe someone else would like to have their thoughts.
Can you go backwards on this?
Yeah.
Go back to the previous one. Are you sure Looney did? No. One forward. Stop there. Are you sure Looney didn't draw that?
Oh, the little duck. I think he did.
What a little duck.
Yeah. I like little ducks.
Yeah.
I've heard you give bits of this talk a few times, Robin. You've done it at Hurstville Bible class once or twice, haven't you? Bits of it?
Yeah, I've got bits and pieces here.
It keeps getting clearer. It honestly keeps getting clearer. I don't know how anybody now could look at Revelation in a linear sense. I always feel bad about saying this because John Thomas did a monumental job putting it all together. I mean, the guy must have worked his insides out. But when you sit back and you look at it and compare it to Daniel, no one would take Daniel ever as a linear progress in time. Every one of the symbols in Daniel, both the image and the beasts, are all parallel to each other. And how anyone could take Revelation to be linear, I do not know. I reckon what you've shown absolutely is that all of the trumpets and the vials and all that sort of stuff are in parallel, and they are representing the same events. And every one of the events you can get another clue from looking at the next line of them. So I reckon it's really good. I really liked it, and you're gonna have to do something with it.
I'm trying to. I hope to make it into a YouTube.
Yeah, I'll have to do something. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good. And the beauty of it is, if it's out there on YouTube, then who knows who might come across it.
Mm.
I think you've also shown some of the cyclical nature of history as well, the way that things have a way of repeating, and that we can take lessons from what's gone before and apply them to our own lives and get a sense of what is coming again.
Yeah. And I think if you looked at it just sort of more slowly, you've done a whole coverage tonight. But if you look at things like, why do you choose where you started with the Jews being sort of dispossessed from God's grace and the Christians taking over, then you have that change after the 7 trumpets, and suddenly it becomes talk about these days. Things like starting at Hitler. One of the things I've never really understand about Revelation is, if we take the normal classical interpretation that it's all Europe and the Catholic Church, etc., why are the biggest events ever to happen left out of it? I mean, the biggest event for any Christian to look at is things like the return of Israel, the persecution of the Jews by Hitler, etc. Why would they be left out of a prophecy that's all about the future? And what you've just said is they're not. They're all incorporated into the 5th trumpet, or whatever. And you started it from Hitler. And did you say Hitler was the beast that was wounded, or Germany was?
He's the. It says one of the heads has a mortal wound, now healed.
Yeah. Well, Germany not only was defeated in the war, but it was cut in half. It was divided into East and West Germany, which was an absolute mortal wound. You destroyed the nation by doing that.
Yeah.
I would have thought in 1989 that it would have come back together again and transferred the hatred of the Jews over to the Arabs. Yeah, it's great.
I think it's really encouraging to put where we are now, hiding in our towns and cities, in the context of Revelation as well.
Yeah.
That it's all part of the end time stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you have the prophet Daniel doing a similar thing in his own time as well, basically saying, I understood from